Last week, I secretly installed a thumb-sized camera in the corner of my kitchen. I told no one, not even my son. This morning, my daughter-in-law came over with soup and smiled. "I just want to take care of Dad." I nodded and acted normal, but maybe I forgot to mention one thing to her, that the kitchen was already being watched. That night, I checked the footage. I held my breath, rewound it, and stared at a tiny moment, just a few seconds, easy to miss. But what I saw made my blood run cold. If you made it here, thank you truly. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I'd love to know who's in this room with me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is entirely coincidental, but the message it carries, that part is meant for you. The first Friday of October, I was standing at my kitchen table in my bathrobe counting money that was no longer there. The percolator was going. The oak tree out front had started turning that deep amber color Margaret used to call Tennessee gold. Everything about that morning looked ordinary. Everything felt wrong. I counted the bills a second time slower. Then I opened my ledger, the small blue notebook I had kept since 1987, every entry dated, every dollar accounted for. I ran my finger down the last 6 weeks of numbers and felt the cold truth settle into my chest, like a stone dropped in still water. $540. Gone in small amounts, 50 here, 80 there, 120 the week before last. Careful amounts. Invisible amounts if you were not the kind of man who wrote everything down. I had just closed the ledger when I heard the front door open. "Dad!" James's voice came down the hallway, warm and easy the way it always was. "You up?" I put the ledger in the kitchen drawer, set the tin box back on the shelf, and had my coffee mug in my hand by the time he walked in. 42 years old, and he still moved through my house like he owned it, jacket unzipped, keys jingling, that wide Carter smile already on his face. "Morning," I said. "Didn't expect you this early. Rachel's got the soup on in the car. We thought we'd do lunch early today." He pulled out a chair and sat down without being asked, the way he had since he was 6 years old. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," I said. "Slept fine." He looked at me the way he had been looking at me since the dizzy spell 3 weeks ago, that careful, measuring look that I used to think was concern. "You sure you look a little pale?" "I'm 70 years old, James. Pale is my natural color." He laughed at that, and I laughed too, and I hated how easy it was, how normal, how I was standing 4 feet away from my son and smiling at him while $540 worth of questions burned a hole in the drawer beside me. Rachel came in through the back door a minute later, carrying a pot wrapped in a dish towel and a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread. 39 years old, dark hair pulled back, wearing that soft blue cardigan she always wore on Fridays. She looked up and gave me the smile, the warm one, the careful one, the one that had taken me 2 months too long to look at closely. "Thomas." She set this pot on the stove and came over to squeeze my arm. "You feel cold. Have you been sitting in a draft?" "I'm fine, Rachel. Let me get the soup going. James, can you grab the bowl's top cabinet left side?" She was already moving to the stove, lifting the lid, stirring. "I made chicken and wild rice today, Thomas. Your favorite." "You didn't have to do all this," I said. "Oh, stop." She waved the spoon at me without turning around. "This is nothing. Sit down, relax." I sat. I watched her move around my kitchen, comfortable, practiced, knowing exactly where everything was. The bowls, the ladle, the dish towel on the second hook. She had learned the layout of my kitchen faster than some people learn their own. I thought about that now. James leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms above his head. "We were thinking, Dad, maybe this weekend we could drive out and look at that property on Lewisburg Pike, the one I mentioned last month." "What property?" "The smaller place. Single-story, newer construction." He said it lightly, casually, looking at the ceiling. Just to look. No pressure. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. I like this house, James. I know you do, but it's a lot of house for one person. He brought his eyes back down to mine. And the stairs after what happened with the dizzy spell. I tripped, I said, outside, on level ground. Still. He glanced toward Rachel, who was ladling soup into bowls with her back to us. Something passed between them. I caught the tail end of it, just a flicker. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, that's all. Rachel set a bowl in front of me, then one in front of James. She sat down across from me with her own bowl and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. We worry, Thomas. You know that. I know, I said, and I appreciate it. I picked up my spoon. The soup was good. It was always good. That was the thing about Rachel. She was good at everything she did. Cooking, smiling, worrying out loud, filling up a room with warmth that felt completely real until the moment you started asking yourself why a woman would spend this much time taking care of a man she had never been particularly close to before his dizzy spell. We talked through lunch the way we always did, James asking about the neighbors, Rachel telling me about her sister's new house in Murfreesboro, both of them filling the kitchen with easy conversation that asked nothing of me except that I nod and smile and stay exactly where I was. When we were done eating, Rachel stood and began gathering the bowls. I'll clean up. You two go sit in the living room. I can help, I said. Thomas. She gave me that look, gentle, immovable. Go sit down, please. James was already pushing back his chair. Come on, Dad. There's a game on. I followed my son into the living room and settled into my armchair while he turned on the TV and found the pregame show. We sat together and watched men in suits talk about football, and I said the right things at the right moments. And the whole time I could hear Rachel moving around in my kitchen. The clink of bowls, the sound of the faucet, the soft shuffle of her feet on the tile. She was in there for 24 minutes. I counted. When she finally came back into the living room, drying her hands on the dish towel, her expression was exactly the same as when she had left. Warm, easy, unhurried. All done, she said. Thomas, I left some extra soup in the fridge for tonight. And I reorganized your spice cabinet. It was getting a little cluttered. Thank you, Rachel, I said. She smiled. Of course. They left around 2 o'clock. James hugged me at the door, a real hug, firm and brief, the way men do it. Rachel kissed my cheek and told me to call if I needed anything. I stood on the porch and watched James's car back out of the driveway and disappear around the corner. Then I went back to the kitchen. I opened the drawer and took out the ledger. I opened the tin box and counted the money one more time, still $540 short. I stood at that counter for a long time looking at the tin box and listening to the silence of my own house, the house where I had lived for 41 years. Where Margaret had cooked at this stove and laughed at this table and told me I was too careful about everything. Everything matters, Margaret, I thought. That's how you know when something's wrong. 24 minutes. Rachel had been alone in this kitchen for 24 minutes, and my son had made sure I was not in it. By 2 o'clock that same afternoon, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I would not say a single word to James or Rachel. Not that day, not the next day, not until I had something more solid than numbers in a notebook and a cold knot sitting in the middle of my chest. The second decision was the one that mattered. I was going to turn Margaret's tin box into the most expensive mistake Rachel Carter had ever made. I got dressed khakis, a flannel shirt, my old cap, and I drove out along Old Hillsborough Road to a small electronics shop I had noticed but never entered. It sat between a dry cleaner and a shuttered diner, the kind of place that had been there 20 years without anyone paying it much attention. A hand-painted sign above the door read Pete's Tech Sales and Repair. There were no other cars in the lot. That suited me fine. The last thing I needed was to run into someone who knew James. A man about my age was behind the counter when I walked in, thick through the shoulders, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up at the sound of the bell above the door. "What can I do for you?" "Security cameras," I said. "Small ones, wireless. something that records to the cloud. He nodded and came around the counter without asking what I needed them for, or why an old man in a flannel shirt was buying surveillance equipment on a Friday afternoon. Pete, the name was stitched on his shirt, walked me to a shelf along the back wall and pointed out 3 options. "These 2 here are your best bet for indoor use," he said, holding up a compact unit no bigger than a deck of cards. Battery lasts 3 to 4 weeks. Connects to your phone. Uploads footage every 15 minutes automatic. Goes straight to your cloud account. "What happens if someone finds it and unplugs it?" I asked. Pete looked at me for just a moment over the top of his glasses. Not a suspicious look. More like the look of a man who had heard that question before and knew exactly what it meant. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Once it uploads, it's already gone to the server. You can break the camera into 100 pieces, and the footage is still sitting right there on your account. Nothing to destroy." "I'll take 2, I said. I paid in cash and drove home with the bag on the passenger seat, the afternoon sun throwing long shadows across the hills. I took the back roads, the quiet ones, and I let myself think. I had been a careful man my whole life. Careful with money, careful with words, careful with trust. Margaret used to say it was my best quality and my most exhausting one. "Thomas," she told me once, laughing in that wound she had that made everything feel lighter. "One day you are going to think yourself right past something wonderful because you were too busy making sure it was safe." Maybe she was right. But careful had kept us out of trouble for 41 years. And right now, careful was the only thing I had going for me. I set up the first camera on the kitchen bookshelf, nestled between the clay pot Rachel had given me and a novel I had never finished, angled to cover the counter. The stove and the upper shelf where the tin box sat. I spent 20 minutes adjusting the angle, checking the feed on my phone, walking back and forth across the kitchen to make sure the frame was right. The second camera went at the end of the hallway in an old ceramic mug that had lost its handle, pointed toward the bedroom door. I pulled up both feeds on my phone. Clear, sharp, steady. You could read the title on the novel's spine from across the room. "Good," I said to nobody. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with the tin box, and the last thing I needed, a fine-tipped UV paint marker from the junk drawer left over from a garden project I had abandoned 2 summers ago. UV ink, invisible under normal light, brilliant blue under a black light. I had read about police departments using marked bills in sting operations. The principle was simple enough that a retired man in Franklin, Tennessee could apply it himself. I took out every bill, counted them once more, and marked each one the same way, a small dot in the lower right corner the size of a period at the end of a sentence. Invisible. Patient. Waiting. When every bill was marked, I stacked them neatly, placed them back in the box, and arranged Margaret's ring and her brooch on top, just as they always were. I smoothed the tissue paper lining. I closed the lid. I carried the box back to the shelf and set it down in the exact spot it had occupied for years. I stepped back and looked at it. Same box, same shelf, same faded winter scene on the lid. But this time it was ready. "Come and get it, Rachel," I said quietly. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dimness for a moment, watching the small green indicator light blink steadily on the camera between the clay pot and the novel. Patient and unwavering, like a good sentry at his post. I was not a vengeful man. I had never wanted to be. Margaret would have been the first to remind me that anger was a fire you had to tend carefully or it burned the wrong things down. But there was a difference between vengeance and justice. And standing in my dark kitchen that October evening, with the camera blinking and the marked bills waiting and the tin box sitting exactly where it always sat, I did not feel angry. I felt ready. I made myself a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, the bachelor's standby, and ate at the kitchen table while the early dark settled over the yard outside. After I washed up, I sat in Margaret's chair by the window for a while, the one she liked, because it caught the afternoon light, and I let myself sit with the full weight of what I was doing. My son, my son's wife, my own kitchen. I don't want to be right about this, I said softly, to the chair, to the room, to the memory of her that still lived in the particular stillness of this house after dark. I want to be a foolish old man who can't keep track of his own money. But I had kept track of my own money for 40 years, and the numbers did not lie. I went to bed just after 9 earlier than usual. I lay in the dark with my hands flat on my chest, listening to the house breathe around me. The familiar settle of the floorboards, the tick of the hallway clock, the sound of the neighbor's wind chimes 3 houses down. The camera was watching. The trap was set. The next move belonged to Rachel, and when she made it, I would be waiting. Monday morning, I told Rachel I had a 9 o'clock appointment with my dentist over on Murfreesboro Road. I said it the night before over the phone, keeping my voice easy and unhurried, the way a man does when he has absolutely nothing to hide. "Oh, do you want James to drive you?" she asked right away. "No need," I said. "It's just a cleaning. I'll be fine. Are you sure the road's on Monday morning?" "Rachel." I put just enough warmth into my voice to close the subject. "I've been driving myself to the dentist for 50 years. I think I can manage one more time." She laughed softly. "Okay, I'll come by around 11 with lunch then." "That sounds just fine," I said. "See you then." I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with age. Then I set the phone down and went to bed. Monday morning, I left the house at 8:45, early enough to be convincing, late enough that Rachel would know I was already gone when she arrived. I drove 3 blocks down to Elm Street, pulled in under the big sycamore trees, where the shade would keep my car from being obvious, and cut the engine. Then I opened my phone and pulled up the camera feed. The kitchen was empty. The tin box sat on its shelf exactly where I had left it. The green indicator light on the camera blinked steady and quiet between the clay pot and the Grisham novel. I sat back in my seat and I waited. At 9:17, the back door opened. I watched Rachel step into my kitchen on a 2-inch screen, and I felt my jaw tighten. She was wearing her blue cardigan again, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She set the bag on the counter, looked around the kitchen. Once a quick practiced scan, the kind a person does when they want to confirm they are alone, and then she walked straight to the shelf where the tin box sat. No hesitation, no pause. She had done this before, many times before. My knuckles went white around the phone. She lifted the box down with both hands, carried it to the kitchen table, and sat down. She opened the lid, pushed aside the tissue paper, and took out the stack of bills. I watched her count them with her thumb, fast and efficient, the way a bank teller counts, not someone discovering money, but someone auditing what was theirs. "That's my money," I said to nobody, to the inside of my car, my voice coming out harder than I expected. She folded the bills, my marked bills, every one of them, and tucked them into the front pocket of her cardigan. Then she looked back into the box, and that was when everything changed. I watched her reach into the tin and lift out Margaret's wedding ring. The gold band caught the kitchen light for just a moment, a small plain flash, and Rachel held it up and turned it between her fingers, the way a jeweler examines a piece for value. My throat closed up entirely. That ring had been on Margaret's finger for 38 years. 38 years of dish soap and garden soil and Sunday mornings and the particular warmth of a hand held in the dark. Margaret had taken it off herself in the hospital when her fingers had swollen, and the nurses said it was safer. And she had pressed it into my palm and said, "Keep this safe, Thomas. I'm going to want it back." She never got it back. And now Rachel Carter was dropping it into her canvas tote bag like it was a trinket from a yard sale. She reached back into the box and took the silver brooch, next the flower-shaped one from Savannah, the one I had bought in secret, and wrapped in tissue paper, and slid across the breakfast table on our 25th anniversary, while Margaret cried and told me I was ridiculous. Gone. Into the bag. Just like that. I pressed my fist against my mouth and breathed through my nose slow and even, the way the doctor had taught me after my blood pressure climbed 3 years ago. My eyes were burning in a way I had not felt since the morning they called me from the hospital to tell me Margaret was gone. Rachel closed the tin box, smoothed the lid, and carried it back to the shelf. She placed it in exactly the right spot. Then she pulled out her phone, typed something, quickly put it away, and began unloading groceries from her tote bag with the calm, unhurried movements of a woman who had done nothing wrong. I sat in my car under the sycamore trees and watched my daughter-in-law make herself at home in my kitchen for 19 more minutes before she left. Then I drove back. I pulled into the driveway at 10:50, came in through the front door, hung up my jacket. Rachel arrived 11 minutes later, knocking twice before letting herself in with the spare key, carrying a container of chicken salad and a sleeve of crackers. "How is the dentist?" She set everything on the counter and turned to smile at me. "No cavities," I said. "Clean bill of health." "That's great." She started opening cabinets, pulling out plates. "You want to eat in the kitchen or the living room? It's nice light in the living room today." "Kitchen's fine," I said. I pulled out my chair and sat down, right across from where she had sat 2 hours ago, counting my money with her thumb. She set a plate in front of me, arranged the crackers in a neat little fan the way she always did, and poured us both a glass of water from the pitcher in the fridge. Then she sat down across from me and tucked her hair behind her ear and said, "You seem quiet today, Thomas. Everything okay?" I looked at her, at the blue cardigan, at the canvas tote bag hanging on the back of her chair. "Just tired," I said. "The older I get, the more a simple errand takes it out of me." She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "That's completely normal. You're doing great, honestly. James and I were just saying the other day how well you're managing." "Were you?" I said. "Absolutely." She smiled and picked up a cracker. "We're so proud of you." I smiled back at her. I picked up my fork. I ate my chicken salad, and the whole time all I could think about was Margaret's ring sitting at the bottom of that canvas tote bag, not 3 feet away from me, while Rachel told me how proud they were. I had been a patient man my whole life. That patience was about to run out. Wednesday she brought soup. Chicken soup, same as the week before, and the week before that, the kind that filled up a kitchen with warmth and made a person feel taken care of. That was always Rachel's particular gift. She could walk into a room and make everything feel safe, feel tended, to feel like home. For 2 months, I had let that gift wash over me the same way I let the October sunlight come through the kitchen window, grateful and unquestioning. I was done being unquestioning. After what I had seen on Monday, I had spent Tuesday night at the kitchen table with a small plastic container and a square of aluminum foil, tucking them both into the back of the junk drawer behind the rubber bands and spare batteries. Just in case. A careful man prepares for the thing he hopes will not happen. Wednesday morning, Rachel knocked at 10, let herself in with the spare key before I reached the door, and came down the hall, carrying the pot with both hands and that same bright smile. "Smells good," I said. "Homemade stock," she said proudly, moving past me toward the kitchen. "I started it last night. None of that carton stuff, Thomas, real bones, real vegetables. You deserve the good version. You didn't have to go to all that trouble." "It's no trouble." She set the pot on the stove and turned the burner to medium. "Go sit down. I'll call you when it's ready." "I'll keep you company," I said. Something crossed her face, fast, almost invisible, gone before I could name it. Then the smile came back, easy as ever. "Of course, grab a seat." I pulled out the kitchen chair and sat facing the stove, my hands flat on the table in front of me, my eyes on Rachel. She moved through the kitchen the way she always did, efficient, comfortable, completely at home. She stirred the pot, adjusted the flame, reached for the salt on the second shelf, without looking, because she knew exactly where I kept it. We talked. She told me about her sister's kitchen renovation, about a movie she and James had seen over the weekend, about how the leaves on the drive over had been just beautiful this morning. Had I noticed? And I said yes, I had noticed, And isn't October something? And her sister's kitchen sounds lovely. And I watched her hands. Her right hand stirred. Her left hand set down the wooden spoon, picked it up again, set it down. Everything normal. Everything practiced. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her breathing was easy. Then my phone buzzed on the table. A text from my neighbor, Bill Henderson, something about a fallen branch on the fence line we shared. I looked down at the screen, then back up at Rachel. "Excuse me, just 1 second," I said, pushing back my chair. "Bill's got a fence issue. Let me just step out and call him back." "Take your time," Rachel said warmly. "Soup needs another few minutes anyway." I walked out to the hallway, stopped just past the doorframe, and turned my phone sideways. The camera app was already open. I had pulled it up before she arrived. I angled the screen toward the kitchen doorway and watched. Rachel stirred the pot twice, looked toward the hallway, stirred again. Then her right hand moved to the front pocket of her jacket. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. She was quick, I will give her that. Practiced and precise and quick. The small plastic bag came out, the pot lid came off, and her hand tilted over the steam in one fluid motion. A fine white powder, barely a pinch, dissolved into the broth before the lid went back on. The whole thing took 8 seconds. She was stirring again by the time I stepped back into the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, expression easy. "All sorted," I said. "Bill thinks a branch came down on the fence. I'll take a look after lunch. Good thing you've got a good neighbor." She ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the table. "Sit down, it's ready." I sat. She sat across from me with her own bowl and broke a piece of bread in half and handed me the larger piece with a smile that did not reach quite as far as her eyes. I noticed that now the slight lag between the smile starting and the warmth arriving, like a fireplace that takes a few seconds to catch. I picked up my spoon. I ate slowly, 3 spoonfuls, 4, pausing between each one to ask about James's work, to comment on the bread, to be the grateful old man she expected me to be. While she answered, I reached into my lap with my left hand, found the edge of the small plastic container I had slipped into my cardigan pocket that morning, and pressed the lid open with my thumb. By the time Rachel stood to refill her water glass, I had transferred 4 full spoonfuls of soup into the container and sealed it shut. "This is really wonderful, Rachel," I said when she sat back down. "You've outdone yourself." She beamed. "I'm so glad you like it." We finished lunch. She cleaned up 20 minutes in the kitchen alone, same as always, and left around 1:30 with a kiss on my cheek and a reminder to rest. I waited until her car was out of sight. Then I got my jacket, put the container in my inside pocket, and drove across town to the office of Dr. Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been my physician for 15 years, a quiet, methodical man in his early 50s, who had the particular gift of listening before he spoke. His receptionist waved me through when I said it was personal, and I found him at his desk between appointments, reading glasses on a half-eaten sandwich beside his keyboard. He looked up when I walked in. "Thomas, you didn't have an appointment today." "No," I said. I reached into my jacket and set the plastic container on his desk. "I need you to have this tested, Daniel. Whatever's in it, I need to know." He looked at the container, then at me, reading my face with the same careful attention he brought to reading a chart. "Where did this come from?" "My lunch," I said. "Someone put something in it. Something that wasn't supposed to be there." The sandwich sat forgotten. He took off his glasses and folded them in his hand. "Thomas, I know how it sounds," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I know exactly how it sounds. But I need you to trust me on this, Daniel. I need you to send it to an independent lab, not through insurance, not through the hospital system. Somewhere private, somewhere quiet. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes moving over my face the way a doctor's eyes do when they are taking a reading without a machine. Then he reached out and picked up the container. "Give me 72 hours, he said quietly. "And Thomas, don't eat anything you didn't prepare yourself until I call you." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the particular release that comes from no longer carrying something entirely alone. "Thank you, Daniel," I said. He nodded once, already reaching for his phone. I drove home through the Wednesday afternoon streets of Franklin, hands steady on the wheel, and I told myself to be patient, to wait, to let the lab do its work. But the image of that white powder dissolving into the broth stayed with me all the way home. And somewhere underneath the patience and the careful thinking and the 40 years of keeping steady, something cold and certain had taken root. Whatever was in that soup, Rachel had not brought it by accident, and James had not sent her here to cook. Thursday afternoon, James came alone. He said Rachel had a headache, said it casually, the way you mention weather, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I told him I hoped she felt better soon, and I meant it, which was the strangest part of all of this. Even knowing what I knew, I could not simply stop caring about the people I had let into my life. That was not how 70 years of living worked. "You want to sit outside?" James asked, already moving toward the back door. "It's nice out, warm for October." "Sure," I said. "Let me get the tea." I had added a third camera 2 days earlier, a small unit clipped to the gutter above the back porch, angled to cover the yard and the driveway. After what I had watched Rachel do in my kitchen, I decided the inside of the house was not the only place worth watching. I had not told anyone. I had barely even thought about it consciously. It was just what a careful man did when the walls of his own home started feeling unfamiliar. James was already in his chair when I came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea, his long legs stretched in front of him, face tipped up toward the afternoon sun, the way he had done since he was a boy sitting on this same porch. There was a time when that image would have filled me with nothing but warmth. "How are you feeling, Dad?" he asked, taking his glass. Honestly. I lowered myself into the other chair and felt the familiar creak of the old wood beneath me. A little tired, but that's nothing new. The dizziness, some days better than others. He nodded, turning the glass slowly in his hands. Rachel and I were talking. There's a specialist over at Vanderbilt, does a lot of work with balance issues in older patients. We could get you an appointment if you want. "I have Daniel Brooks," I said. "He's looked after me for 15 years. I think he can manage a little dizziness." "Dad." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and gave me the look, the earnest one, the concerned one, the one I had trusted completely until about 4 days ago. "We just want to make sure you're getting the right care. That's all." "I know you do," I said, and I held his gaze and kept my face exactly where I needed it to be, grateful, a little tired, completely unsuspecting. We talked for 40 minutes. Football. The neighbor's new fence. A restaurant downtown that James said had good ribs. Normal things. Easy things. The kind of conversation a father and son have on a Thursday afternoon when everything is fine. Then James's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen and stood up. "Sorry, Dad, I need to take this work thing." "Go ahead," I said, waving a hand. He walked off the porch and out into the yard, moving toward the far corner near the old garden bed, where Margaret used to grow her tomatoes. Far enough that he thought I could not hear. He had his back to me and his voice dropped the moment the call connected. I did not try to listen. I did not need to. The camera was already watching. That evening, after James had gone home and I had eaten a sandwich, I had made entirely myself from groceries. I had bought myself from a store I had driven to alone. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and pulled up the backyard footage. James appeared on the screen at the far corner of the yard, phone pressed to his ear. The audio was faint, but the camera's microphone was better than I had expected. I turned the volume all the way up and held the phone close to my ear. His voice came through in fragments at first. "Went fine," she said. "He ate most of it," and then clearer as he turned slightly toward the house. "How much did you put in today?" A pause while he listened. No, don't give him too much, Rachel." His voice was low and flat, and completely certain the voice of a man giving instructions he had given before. He needs to stay lucid enough to sign. If he gets too foggy too fast, the lawyer's going to start asking questions, and we cannot have that. Another pause. Just keep it consistent. We need another 2, maybe 3 weeks. Then we move. He said something else I could not make out, and then the call ended. He stood in the yard for a moment, looking at the garden bed. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, and by the time he came around the corner onto the porch, his face had rearranged itself, completely easy, relaxed, the good son coming back from a work call. "Sorry about that," he said, picking up his tea glass. "No trouble," I said. "Everything okay? All good?" He smiled at me. "Just some project running long." I smiled back. I picked up my own glass. My hand was rock steady, and I was proud of that, because inside my chest my heart was slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. Sign. James needed me to sign something. He needed me lucid enough to sign, but confused enough not to fight it. He needed 2 or 3 more weeks of whatever Rachel was putting in my food before he was ready to move. Move to what? I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, while the question turned over and over in my mind. What did my son need me to sign? What was worth all of this, the daily visits, the soup, the careful little doses of whatever was dissolving into my meals? What was worth poisoning his own father? I did not sleep much that night. And when the phone rang at 8:15 the next morning, I was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee waiting for Daniel Brooks to give me the next piece of the answer. The phone rang at 8:15 on the dot. I picked up before the second ring. "Daniel, Thomas." His voice was careful, the way a doctor's voice gets careful when the news is not good. Not panicked, not cold, just precise, each word placed deliberately, the way you set down a full glass of water when you cannot afford to spill it. "Can you come in this morning as soon as you can?" My coffee was still hot. I left it on the table and got my jacket. Daniel Brooks ran a small practice on the south end of Main Street, the kind of office that still had paper files and a receptionist who remembered your name and asked about your grandchildren even when you did not have any. I had been coming here since 2010. Daniel had seen me through Margaret's illness, through the grief after, through the slow adjustments of getting older alone. I trusted him the way you trust someone who has sat with you in your worst moments and never once made you feel small for having them. His receptionist waved me straight back when I walked in. Daniel was standing at his desk, not sitting, standing, which told me everything I needed to know about the 48 hours since I had set that container of soup in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and waited until I sat down before he opened the folder in his hands. "I'm going to walk you through this carefully," he said. "I want you to understand exactly what we found, not just the conclusion." "Go ahead," I said. He set 2 pages on the desk and turned them to face me. The sample contained 2 compounds. The first is a synthetic antihypertensive, a blood pressure medication in powdered form. A small dose added to food daily would cause dizziness, fatigue, and occasional lightheadedness. In a man your age, those symptoms would look completely consistent with normal aging. I stared at the page. The words were clinical and clean, and they hit me like something physical, square in the center of my chest. "The second compound," Daniel continued, his voice steady and even, "is a mild central nervous system depressant. Low doses over time produce short-term memory disruption, mild confusion, and difficulty concentrating. Again, in a 70-year-old man, every single one of those symptoms would appear entirely natural. A different physician seeing you for the first time would almost certainly document cognitive decline." "Cognitive decline," I repeated. "Yes." He sat down now, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. "Thomas, whoever put this in your food was not trying to kill you. The doses are too small for that. They were trying to make you appear over a period of weeks as though you were losing your mental capacity. The room felt very still. Through the window behind Daniel, I could see the elm trees on Main Street bending slightly in the morning wind, leaves shaking loose and drifting down, and I had the strange, distant thought that Margaret would have loved this particular shade of October morning light, so that someone could make decisions for me, I said. That would be the logical purpose, yes. Daniel's jaw was tight. Thomas, I need to be direct with you. Under Tennessee law, I am required to report suspected elder abuse. What I found in that sample, this is abuse. This is a crime. I know, I said, and I'm asking you to wait. He blinked. Wait. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I kept my voice level even though my hands wanted to shake and I would not let them. Daniel, I have footage. I have marked bills. I have this report. But I don't yet have the thing that explains why, and without that they walk away from this. James is smart. Rachel is careful. If we move now before I know what they're trying to get me to sign, they find a lawyer, and they tell a story, and none of what I have is enough. Daniel pressed his fingers flat against the desk, looking at me hard. You've been eating this. I stopped Wednesday. You told me to, and I did. The symptoms are already clearing, I said. The dizziness is better. My head is clearer than it's been in weeks, which tells me exactly when they started. I leaned forward. Daniel, I am not in immediate danger. I have not eaten anything Rachel prepared since Wednesday afternoon. I am asking you, as my physician, as my friend, to give me a little more time. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving over my face with that particular searching look of a man weighing what he knew against what he was being asked to do. Then he exhaled through his nose and leaned back in his chair. 2 weeks, he said. That's all I can give you, Thomas. After that, I report it with or without your blessing. Are we clear? Crystal, I said. And you are not eating anything you didn't buy and prepare yourself. Not a bite. And if you feel any dizziness, any confusion, any symptom at all, I call you first, I said, before anyone else. He looked at me for another moment. Then something in his expression shifted, not softer exactly, but more settled, the way a man looks when he has made a decision he knows he will have to live with. He closed the folder and pushed it across the desk toward me. Keep a copy of this, he said. Store it somewhere safe, not in your house. I picked up the folder. It was light in my hands, just 2 pages, just a few paragraphs of clinical language, but it felt heavier than anything I had carried in years. Because this was not suspicion anymore. This was not numbers in a ledger or footage on a phone screen. This was proof. Thank you, Daniel, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped raw at the edges in a way I had not planned on. He stood when I stood the way he always did, and he shook my hand with both of his the way he had the morning he called to tell me Margaret was gone. You find out what he needs you to sign, he said quietly, and then you end this. I walked out of his office into the sharp October morning, the folder tucked inside my jacket against my chest, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with my face turned up to the sky. My son had been poisoning me. I had proof. And somewhere in a law office in Franklin, Tennessee, there was a piece of paper with my name on it that explained why. I was going to find it. James had left a business card on my kitchen counter 3 weeks ago. I had noticed it at the time, Gerald Whitmore Estate Planning and Elder Law, 114 Main Street, Franklin, and thought nothing of it. James mentioned him twice after that. Once as a good estate lawyer, and once as someone who can help us get your paperwork sorted, Dad. Both times I had nodded and said nothing. Monday morning, I decided to find out exactly what paperwork James had in mind. I parked on Main Street just after 9, fed the meter 2 quarters, and walked the half block to the address on the card. Whitmore's office sat between an insurance agency and a flower shop, the kind of place that announced its respectability through beige carpet and framed diplomas, and a receptionist who smiled the way people do when they've been trained to put you at ease. Good morning, she said. Do you have an appointment? I don't, I said. My name is Thomas Carter. I believe my son James Carter has been in contact with this office. I'd like to speak with Mr. Whitmore about some documents that involve my name. She hesitated just a fraction of a second, enough for me to notice, not enough to mean anything definitive. Let me check with him. One moment. She disappeared down a short hallway. I stood in the waiting room with my cap in my hands and looked at the framed prints on the wall Thomas Jefferson quotes about liberty and property, and felt my jaw tighten one careful notch. Whitmore came out to greet me himself. Mid-50s, silver hair, combed back, a handshake that was firm without being aggressive. The kind of man who had learned to make older clients feel comfortable because older clients were his business. "Mr. Carter," he said warmly, "please come in." His office smelled like wood polish and printer paper. He gestured me into the chair across from his desk and settled into his own seat, with the unhurried ease of a man who charged by the hour and had learned never to appear rushed. "Your son mentioned you might be coming in," he said, opening a desk drawer. "He said you'd want to review the documents before the signing." I kept my face completely neutral, even though something cold moved through me from my collar to my heels. James told him I was coming, which meant James had anticipated this moment, which meant he was more careful than I had given him credit for. "That's right," I said. "I like to read things carefully before I put my name on them. Habit of a lifetime." Whitmore smiled. "A very sensible habit." He set a folder on the desk and slid it across to me. "Take all the time you need." I opened the folder. The top page read, "Durable Power of Attorney, Full Authority." Below the title, my name. Below that, James Robert Carter, designated as my agent with full authority to act on my behalf in all financial matters, property transactions, banking decisions, and healthcare choices. Effective immediately upon signing, irrevocable without legal challenge, unless I could demonstrate mental competency at the time of revocation. 7 pages. I turned each one slowly, the way a man reads a contract he is considering, pausing at certain paragraphs, nodding slightly, as if processing the language. My right hand rested on the desk. My left hand under the table held my phone pressed flat against my thigh. I angled the phone upward 1 degree at a time until the camera lens was pointing at the page in front of me. Tap. Turn the page. Tap. 7 pages. 7 photographs. "Any questions?" Whitmore asked when I closed the folder. "Just one," I said, setting the folder back on his desk with both hands. "If I sign this, what happens to my house?" He folded his hands on the desk. "The property at your current address would fall under your son's authority to manage, lease, or sell as he sees fit, in the interest of your care and well-being." "I see," I said. "And my bank accounts. Full authority to access and manage all financial instruments listed in the schedule on page 5. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, a delivery truck rumbled down Main Street. A perfectly ordinary Monday morning in Franklin, Tennessee, and I was sitting in a beige office watching a polite man explain how my son planned to take everything Margaret and I had built over 40 years. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," I said, standing and extending my hand. "I'll need a few more days to think it over." He stood and shook it smooth and practiced. "Of course, James mentioned you might want a little time. We have a signing appointment penciled in for the 31st. That gives you plenty of room." "The 31st, I repeated. "That's helpful to know." I walked out of his office down the half-block to my car and sat behind the wheel. I opened my phone and scrolled through the 7 photographs. Clear. Readable. Every word of every page captured in the gray October light of Gerald Whitmore's office. My hands were shaking now. I let them shake. There was nobody to see it, and some things deserved a reaction. October 31st. I said to the windshield, to the steering wheel, to whatever part of Margaret was still traveling with me through all of this. That's what all of this has been for. 3 weeks of soup and daily visits and headaches and dizziness, all of it, to get me across a desk on Halloween and make me sign away everything we ever worked for. I pressed my fingers against my eyes until the burning stopped. Then I started the car, and pulled out onto Main Street, heading home, the photographs safe in my phone, and the anger sitting cold and hard in my chest like something I intended to keep. Because I had found what James needed me to sign. Now I needed to find out what Margaret had needed to hide. Tuesday night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done with a cup of tea I had stopped drinking, and the kind of quiet that only comes to a house when one person has lived in it alone for too long. I was thinking about a Tuesday night in November of 2019. Margaret had been home from the hospital 4 days, her second admission that year. Another round of tests that came back inconclusive. Another set of doctors who looked at her chart and said age-related, and let's monitor it, and sent her home with pamphlets about sodium and rest. She had sat in this same chair in this same kitchen, and she had taken my hand across the table the way she did when she had something important to say, and wanted to make sure I was listening. "Thomas," she had said, "there's something I need to tell you. About the brooch." I had assumed she meant the insurance. Margaret was always careful about documentation, about making sure things were accounted for properly. "The silver one from Savannah. There's a key inside it." She had said it quietly, without drama, the way she said most important things. "In the back panel there's a small latch you have to press the right side. It opens. And inside there's a key." "A key to what?" "The safe in the bedroom closet. The one behind the winter coats." She had squeezed my hand, then her fingers thin but warm. "I've been keeping some things in there. Things I want you to find, if something doesn't feel right." "Do you understand what I mean, Thomas?" I had told her yes. I had told her I understood. I had kissed her hand and told her not to worry about safes and keys and paperwork, that she was going to be fine, that we had plenty of time. She was gone 14 months later, and I had forgotten about the key entirely. In the 14 months after that November evening, I had been too consumed by her decline, the hospital visits, the morphine adjustments, the paperwork of dying. And after she was gone, I had wrapped that memory in the same grief I wrapped everything else in, and put it somewhere I never went. The brooch had lived in the tin box as a beautiful thing, not a hiding place. I had not let myself think of it any other way. I stood up so fast, the kitchen chair scraped back against the tile, that same loud scrape Margaret had always complained about, and I grabbed my phone off the counter. It was after 9 at night. Too late to call anyone. But I could check. I pulled up the camera footage from the day Rachel had taken the brooch. I watched her lift it from the tin box, turn it in her fingers for just a moment, under the kitchen light, then drop it into her tote bag without a second thought. She had no idea what she was carrying. She had no idea that the little silver flower-shaped pin she had sold for quick cash was the only thing standing between me and the truth Margaret had died trying to protect. I had to find it. Wednesday morning, I started calling antique shops at 8 o'clock. I had a list of 7 within reasonable distance of Franklin. The first one, a place on Columbia Avenue, had not received anything matching that description. The second one had been closed since August. The third was Hargrove's Antiques on Depot Street, run by a woman named Eleanor Hargrove, whose family had operated it for 3 generations, and who answered the phone with the brisk efficiency of someone who had heard every question before. "Hargroves, this is Eleanor." "Good morning," I said. "My name is Thomas Carter. I'm looking for a silver brooch, flower-shaped, about the size of a quarter, antique silver, probably early 20th century. I believe someone may have brought it in recently." A pause. "Then a woman brought in a piece matching that description about 10 days ago. Small flower, 8 petals, silver with some oxidation on the back." My heart lurched so hard I had to put one hand on the counter to steady myself. "That's the one. Is it still there?" "It is. She priced it at $40, but I'd say it's worth considerably more. The craftsmanship is—" "I'll give you $200 for it," I said. "Cash. I can be there in 30 minutes. Another pause, shorter this time. "I'll hold it for you, Mr. Carter." Eleanor Hargrove turned out to be a compact woman in her late 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the carefully appraising eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime assigning value to things other people had underestimated. She had the brooch in a small velvet tray on the counter when I walked in, and she watched me with frank curiosity as I approached. "This belonged to your wife?" she asked. 40 years, I said. My voice came out thicker than I intended. She wore it on special occasions. It was a gift. Eleanor looked at me for a moment. Really looked the way perceptive people do when they're deciding how much of what they're seeing to acknowledge. Then she picked up the brooch and set it in my palm without another word about the price. "200 is more than fair," she said. "I'm glad it's going back where it belongs." I paid her and walked out into the sharp October morning, the brooch in my closed fist, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of Depot Street, and I let myself feel it. Margaret's brooch back in my hand for the first time since the morning I had opened the tin box and found it gone. The silver was cool against my palm. The petals were worn smooth where Margaret had touched them hundreds of times over the years. "Okay, Margaret," I said, my voice rough and low, cracking just slightly at the edges in a way I did not try to prevent. "Show me." I pressed the right side of the back panel the way she had described. A small latch gave way with the faintest click. The back of the brooch swung open on a tiny hinge barely visible to the naked eye. Inside, secured with a single strip of yellowed tape, was a key. Small brass with the letter M engraved on the head in Margaret's careful hand. I stared at that key for a long time. My eyes were burning, and my throat was tight, and my hands, for the first time since all of this started, were trembling in a way I could not entirely control. "I forgot," I whispered to her to the key to the October sky through my windshield. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. I forgot about the key." I closed my fingers around the brooch, started the car, and drove home. The safe was in the bedroom closet behind 2 winter coats I had not worn since the year she died. I moved them aside, pressed the false panel, and found the gray metal box exactly where we had put it together in 1998. Combination lock on the left keyhole on the right. I slid Margaret's key into the lock. It turned without resistance, as if it had been waiting. And as the door swung open, I understood with a certainty that settled over me like cold water that whatever was inside this safe was the reason Margaret had spent the last year of her life preparing for a danger she prayed would never come. She had been right to prepare, and I had almost been too late to find it. Before I tell you what I found inside that safe, what Margaret had been hiding for 6 years, the secret she never got the chance to speak out loud, I need to know you're still with me. Drop a 9 in the comments right now. Just that one number. It tells me everything. One more thing before we continue the story ahead contains some fictional elements built around a very human truth. If that's not something you want to hear, no judgment. This is your moment to step away. But if you're staying, brace yourself. What comes next changes everything. The brass key was still warm from my pocket when I pressed it into the lock on the evening of October 16th, 2025. The sun had gone down an hour earlier, leaving the bedroom wrapped in a darkness that felt heavier than usual, the kind that settles into a house when it knows something important is about to happen. I had been standing in front of Margaret's false panel for 3 full minutes, key in hand, unable to move. My whole body felt the weight of what might be waiting inside. I pressed the right edge of the panel the way she had shown me once, just once, back in 2003. The wood shifted with a hollow click. Behind it sat a gray steel box about the size of a shoebox. The brass key slid in. The tumblers turned. Inside lay a manila envelope flat on top of a red plastic folder. Both sealed. Both in Margaret's handwriting, that neat, careful cursive she used for jam jar labels and birthday cards. "Thomas, only if something feels wrong." My throat sealed shut so fast I had to grab the doorframe with both hands to stay upright. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for weeks. I carried the box to the bed and sat down on the edge, pressing the envelope against my chest for a full 30 seconds before I could make myself open it. The letter inside was 2 pages dated September 3rd, 2019, 6 years ago. My darling, if you are reading this, then I was right to be afraid. Her voice came off the page so clearly, I had to close my eyes. She was right there, her breath, her careful pen strokes, the way she chose every word like she was building something that needed to last. For the past 8 months, I have been having episodes of dizziness, confusion, and trembling that Dr. Pendleton cannot fully explain. My blood pressure drops without warning. I have been keeping a log. I have also noticed that the episodes are worse on the days Rachel brings me meals. My hands started shaking. The paper rattled between my fingers, and I pressed it flat against my knee, hard, willing myself to keep still. I know how terrible that sounds to write. I know it sounds like a frightened woman's imagination. But I kept samples, Thomas. They are in the red folder. I had the third one tested privately at a lab in Nashville. The results are there too. Whatever you find, please do not confront James alone. Promise me that. I set the letter down on the white bedspread. My chest was heaving. I pressed both palms flat against the mattress and forced air in through my nose, out through my mouth, the breathing exercise my cardiologist had given me after my bypass, the one I had not needed in 8 years. In, out, stay sharp, Thomas. I reached for the red folder. Inside were 3 small sealed bags, each labeled in Margaret's handwriting, with a date and the words, Soup Rachel. Beneath them, a single sheet of lab results printed on Nashville Diagnostic Solutions letterhead, dated October 14th, 2019. Sample contains trace levels of amlodipine, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension. Concentration insufficient to be acutely dangerous, but consistent with low-level chronic exposure. I read that sentence 4 times. The words rearranged themselves every time, hunting for a gentler meaning. They did not find one. Amlodipine, the same drug class Dr. Daniel Brooks had flagged in my blood panel 3 weeks ago. A sound tore out of me that I had never heard from my own body before, raw and ragged. Not quite a sob, more like the crack a tree makes, the instant before it falls. I clamped both hands over my mouth and sat there in the dark, with Margaret's letter in my lap, and the truth of what had been done to her pressing down on my chest like a stone. They had practiced on her first. The thought detonated behind my eyes. My vision went white at the edges. I stood up, back down, stood up again, because my legs could not decide what they were for. My heart slammed against my ribs with a violence I had not felt since the morning the hospital called to tell me she was gone. They had tested it on Margaret. They had refined it. And when she died of what every doctor in Williamson County called cardiovascular complications, they had walked away clean and come back for me. I pressed Margaret's photograph on the nightstand, with my fingertip, her laughing, at the county fair in 1987. A sunflower tucked behind her ear. 23 years old, and not yet afraid of anything. I pressed my finger against her face the way a man touches something he is terrified of losing all over again. "I'm going to finish what you started, Margaret," I said out loud to the dark room, to the photograph, to whatever part of her might still be listening. I swear to God I am. I picked up my phone. Dr. Daniel Brooks. My thumb hovered over his name for half a second. It was 9:42 on a Thursday evening. And then I pressed call because some things were too large to wait until morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Thomas, what's wrong?" "I found something, Daniel," I said, and my voice cracked clean down the middle on that last word. "About Margaret. About what happened to her. I need you to come over. Tonight, if you can manage it." A pause. Then carefully, "Are you safe right now?" "For tonight, yes. Give me 20 minutes. The call ended. I set the phone on the bedside table next to Margaret's photograph and looked at the lab report still spread across the white bedspread. Outside the bedroom window, the October dark was absolute, no moon, no stars, just the quiet creak of the house settling around me, like it was trying to hold me together, while I figured out how to hold everything else. She had been right. She had gathered evidence and hidden it, and written me a letter just in case. She had done everything right, and it still had not been enough to save her. I looked at the sealed evidence bags and made myself a promise I intended to keep with every breath I had left. This time it would be. Dr. Daniel Brooks arrived at 10 past 10 that same Thursday night, wearing a gray cardigan over his pajama top and carrying his battered black bag like he had never stopped making house calls. He took one look at my face in the doorway and walked straight to the kitchen table without waiting to be asked. I spread Margaret's letter and the lab report flat under the overhead light. He read every word twice slowly, in the careful way of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked through 11:20, 11:21. "Thomas," he said finally, and the way he said my name, low, deliberate, like he was steadying something, made the back of my eyes sting all over again. "How long have you had this?" "I found it last night. In the bedroom closet behind a false panel she built herself. Daniel, she wrote this 6 years ago. She was documenting everything 6 years ago." He set the paper down and pressed both hands over his face. When he lowered them, something had shifted in his expression, something harder and hotter than I was used to seeing from a man who had spent 30 years projecting calm. "Amlodipine. Same drug class I found in your panel." "Yes, Thomas, this is not coincidence. No, it is not." He tapped the lab results with 2 fingers. "The concentration in your blood is low, subclinical. Someone is being very deliberate, low enough that your symptoms read as age-related decline, high enough to impair judgment and physical stability over time." His voice dropped. "If someone maintained this dosage long enough, it would erode your legal capacity. The courts would question whether you could make sound decisions." The bluntness of it landed like a fist to the sternum. I gripped the table edge. They kept her alive long enough that no one questioned it when she finally died. He did not soften it. He held my gaze and gave me the honest answer. "That is what this evidence suggests, Thomas. I want to be wrong." He looked down at Margaret's sealed sample bags. "I don't believe I am." We sat with that truth for a long moment, the kind of moment that does not need filling with words. Then he pulled a yellow notepad from his bag and uncapped a pen. "You need to take this to law enforcement. Not to James, not to a family attorney, to someone with criminal investigative authority." "I'll go to the Franklin Police Department," I said, "first thing Friday morning." "Do you want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "If James is watching, and I believe he is, I cannot afford a pattern. One late-night house call from my doctor is explainable. 2 visits in 2 days is a signal I can't afford to send." Brooks studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Smart." He wrote his attestation on the notepad, a signed physician's statement, confirming he had personally reviewed the documents and that the drug in Margaret's sample matched the compound found in my blood panel. He pressed the sealed envelope into my hands and held on a second longer than he needed to. "She was a good woman, Thomas." My throat went raw. I squeezed his hand back and could not make a single word come out. I walked into the Franklin Police Department at 9:05 the next morning. Friday, October 17th, 2025. With the envelope under my arm and 3 weeks of evidence in a sealed bag inside my coat. The lobby smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax. A young officer at the front desk looked up at me with the polite disinterest of someone who had already processed 24 routine complaints that morning. "I need to speak to a detective," I said. "The matter involves elder financial abuse theft and what may be criminal medication tampering. I have physical evidence and a signed physician's statement." The energy in the room changed the way a weather front changes suddenly and without negotiation. They put me in a conference room with blue plastic chairs and a table that wobbled at the left corner. 12 minutes later, the door opened, and a woman walked in, who was not what I had imagined. She was perhaps 40, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the way someone does when they have been taking them on and off since 7 in the morning. She carried a legal pad and a cup of coffee she had clearly not had time to finish. "Mr. Carter." She pulled out the chair across from me without ceremony. "I'm investigator Laura Hayes. I understand you have something to show me." Her voice was direct and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had learned that patience was a sharper tool than urgency. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I'm going to need you to hear everything before you decide what category this belongs in. Some of what I'm going to tell you involves my son, and I understand how that sounds coming from an old man." She uncapped her pen and met my eyes with a steadiness that did not waver. "Then let's start from the beginning. And Mr. Carter, take your time." So I told her everything. The tin box, the missing cash, the UV-marked bills, the camera footage, the white powder in the soup, Dr. Brooks's blood panel, the attorney's office, the power of attorney James's plan to move me to a nursing home. And last, because it was the hardest, Margaret's safe, Margaret's letter, Margaret's 6-year-old evidence bag sitting in a Nashville lab report. She wrote in tight, precise shorthand and asked tight, precise questions. "What exact date did you first notice the shortage? Is the camera footage cloud-backed or local only? Do you still have the original soup sample? What is the attorney's full name and office address?" When I finished, she set her pen down. "Mr. Carter, if even half of what you've described is substantiated, you're looking at elder financial abuse, criminal theft, and unlawful medication tampering. The material about your wife is more complex. The chain of custody on those samples is 6 years old and imperfect. But imperfect evidence is not worthless evidence." She looked at me squarely. "Right now, what you've brought me is more than most people walk in with." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Then you believe me." She gave me something better than reassurance. "I believe the evidence. And the evidence is telling a very consistent story." She leaned forward slightly. "Here is what I need from you. Keep your routine identical. Let James and Rachel believe nothing has changed. Can you do that?" "I've been doing it for 3 weeks," I said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but close. "Good." She gathered her notes and paused at the door. "One more question, Mr. Carter. Are you afraid?" I thought of Margaret's handwriting on those sealed bags. I thought of the sound she used to make in the dark toward the end, reaching for my hand when the dizziness took her. "I was afraid," I said. "Right now I'm angry. There's a considerable difference." Hayes gave me a single slow nod, the kind that says, "I see exactly who you are, and I respect it," and walked out. I sat in that blue plastic chair for another minute, feeling the full weight of everything I was carrying, and beneath it, for the first time in weeks, something thin and cautious that might have been hope. I walked out into the October morning, started my truck, and sat with both hands on the wheel. James still believed he was running this story. He had no idea the ending had already been rewritten. I made the decision on a Saturday morning, the 18th of October, 2025, while standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single coffee mug, and watching the oak tree in the backyard drop its leaves one by one into the dead grass. Laura Hayes had told me to keep my routine identical, but she had also said something else before I left that conference room, something I had been turning over in my mind ever since. Let them believe nothing has changed. I dried the mug slowly, set it on the counters, and stared at my own reflection in the dark window above the sink. An old man looked back at me, 70 years old, gray at the temples, lines carved deep around the mouth. A man who had buried his wife. A man whose body was quietly being poisoned by the people who were supposed to love him. I thought about what James wanted me to be. Confused, dependent, incapable of managing his own affairs. A signature waiting to happen. I set the dish towel down and said very quietly to no one but myself, "All right, Thomas, give them what they want." James and Rachel arrived at 11:15 that morning with a casserole dish and a paper bag of groceries, the way they always did on Saturdays. I heard the key in the front door, the spare key I had never taken back, the one that had started all of this, and I shuffled into the hallway in my slippers, slower than I needed to, one hand trailing along the wall. "Dad." James came through first, a wide smile on his face that did not reach his eyes. He set the grocery bag on the hall table and put both hands on my shoulders. "You look tired. Did you sleep okay?" "I don't know," I said, and let my voice go a little vague, a little soft at the edges. I kept waking up. Thought I heard Margaret in the kitchen. I pressed my fingertips to my temple, getting confused about the nights again. James's grip on my shoulders tightened for just a fraction of a second. A pressure quick and controlled, like a man resetting his own reaction. "That happens, Dad. That's okay." Rachel came in behind him, carrying the casserole, her smile wide and practiced and perfect. "Thomas, we brought your favorite chicken and rice. I made it this morning fresh." "That's so kind of you, sweetheart," I said, and smiled back at her the same way I had been smiling at her for weeks, warm, grateful, a little hazy. The kind of smile that said, "I trust you completely. I have no idea what you are doing to me." We sat at the kitchen table. Rachel heated the casserole while James poured iced tea, and I watched them move around my kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of people who believed they already owned it. The camera on the bookshelf behind James, tucked between a copy of Steinbeck and a ceramic rooster Margaret had loved, recorded every single second. "Dad," James said, sitting down across from me, wrapping both hands around his glass. "Rachel and I have been talking, and I want to be honest with you because I love you, and I think you deserve honesty." I looked at him over my iced tea. "All right, son. We're worried about you living alone out here. These episodes you've been having, the dizziness, the confusion, forgetting what day it is." He leaned forward. "There's a place in Brentwood, Magnolia Ridge. It's a senior care facility, beautiful grounds, full medical staff activities. Rachel and I visited it last week." I let my face do something slow and uncertain. I set my glass down with slightly less coordination than I actually had, so it clicked too hard against the table. "A nursing home. A care community?" Rachel corrected, her voice honey smooth. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "It's not like what you're imagining, Thomas. It's lovely. You'd have your own room, your own space, and James and I could visit every week." "Every week," I repeated like a man turning a word over without being sure what it meant. "We just want you to be safe," James said. His eyes were steady, his voice measured, his concern performed with an expertise that would have convinced anyone who did not already know the truth. "That's all any of this is about, Dad. Keeping you safe." I looked down at my hands wrapped around the iced tea glass. My wedding ring, my original ring, the one Margaret had placed on my finger 41 years ago, not the one Rachel had stolen, caught the kitchen light. I let my chin tremble just slightly. I let my eyes go wet. "I just don't want to leave this house," I said. "Your mother and I, everything we built is here." James reached across and pressed his hand over mine, right over the ring, right over Margaret's memory. "I know, Dad. I know it's hard." His voice was gentle, his expression full of filial sorrow. "But sometimes the people who love us have to make the hard calls." I nodded slowly, the way a man nods when his resistance is crumbling. I let a single tear work its way down my left cheek and did not wipe it away. "Let me think about it," I said. "Just give me a little time to think." "Of course," Rachel said warmly, squeezing my hand. "There's no rush." There was. I knew there was. The power of attorney appointment was 12 days away, and every single word James had just spoken, the nursing home Magnolia Ridge, The hard calls had been recorded in high-definition audio and video by the camera between Steinbeck and Margaret's ceramic rooster. After they left at 2:30, I went straight to my laptop and opened the Cloud app. The footage had uploaded automatically, the way it always did, time-stamped and clean. I watched James say, "Sometimes the people who love us have to make the hard calls," and felt my jaw tighten until my back teeth ached. I saved the clip, labeled it, and added it to the folder I had named simply Evidence. Then I picked up the phone and called Laura Hayes. "It's Thomas Carter," I said when she answered. "He brought up the nursing home today. I got it all on camera." A brief pause. Then, "Good. Keep going exactly as you have been. Don't change a thing." "Yes, ma'am," I said. I ended the call, stood up from the kitchen table, and walked to the window. The oak tree outside had lost another dozen leaves while I was performing helplessness for my son and his wife. The yard looked thinner, stripped back, more exposed than it had been that morning. Good, I thought. So do they. They just don't know it yet. James came alone on the Tuesday evening of October 21st, 2025. No casserole. No Rachel. Just my son arriving at 6:40 in a charcoal sport coat he wore when he wanted to project authority, with a smile that was already working too hard before he even stepped through the front door. "Just thought I'd drop by," he said, leaning in to hug me. The way he had been hugging me lately, brief, performative, the embrace of a man checking an obligation off a list. "See how you're doing." Come in," I said, shuffling aside in my slippers. "I made decaf. There's some left if you want it." He followed me to the kitchen and took a seat at the table while I poured 2 mugs with hands that I let tremble slightly more than necessary. I had been practicing that tremor for 3 days. I was getting good at it. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. The Titans season, the price of heating oil, whether the maple at the end of the street was going to be taken down. I watched James the way you watch a man who thinks he is being subtle but is actually searching for something. His eyes kept moving. To the bookshelf. Back to me. To the hallway. Back to me. He had noticed the camera. I did not know exactly when, maybe Saturday, maybe earlier, but something had triggered a new alertness behind his eyes. A calculation I could see him running every time his gaze landed on the shelf between Steinbeck and the ceramic rooster. I kept my own expression soft and vague and unhurried. "Dad," he said, eventually setting his mug down. "Can I ask you something without you taking it the wrong way?" "Of course, son. Are you keeping up with the house okay? Like the technical stuff? The appliances?" He gestured loosely at the bookshelf. "I noticed you have some new devices around. I want to make sure you know how everything works. Sometimes those things can be confusing." I blinked at him with the mild bewilderment of a man who had forgotten more than he'd learned. "Oh, those little camera things Pete at the electronics store helped me set them up a while back. He said they'd help me remember if I left the stove on." I pressed my fingers to my temple. "I've been forgetting the stove, James. Twice last week." Something moved across James's face too fast for him to catch and put away. Relief mixed with contempt, mixed with the particular satisfaction of a man who has confirmed what he already suspected. He believed me. He believed every word. Yeah, that makes sense," he said. "Good thinking." He paused. Do you even know how to check the footage? Or is it just recording to a local drive somewhere?" "I have no idea," I said, and laughed the soft, self-deprecating laugh of a confused old man. "Pete showed me how to turn it on. That's about as far as I got." James nodded. His left hand rested on the table, and I watched his fingers slowly curl into a loose fist and release. Curl and release. He stayed another 30 minutes, helped me rinse the mugs. Told me he loved me at the front door, with the practiced warmth of a man who had rehearsed it, and drove away into the dark. I went back to the kitchen and sat down. The spare key. I had thought about changing the locks twice in the past week, and both times Hayes's voice had come back to me flat and clear. Keep your routine identical. Let them believe nothing has changed. Changing the locks would signal alarm, so I had left them deliberately the same way I had left everything else open, accessible, exactly as it had always been. A trap does not announce itself. I had 2 cameras in that house. James had just identified one of them, the one on the bookshelf, the obvious one. It was not the one I was most concerned about. The second camera was smaller, mounted inside a smoke detector in the hallway ceiling, pointing at a slight downward angle toward the living room and the front bookshelf. James had never looked up. The next morning, Wednesday, the 22nd of October, I was eating toast at the kitchen table when I heard it. A crack. Then a scraping sound. Then the specific grinding noise of something electronic being pulled roughly from a mount. I walked into the living room with my toast still in my hand and found James standing on the footstool from the hallway closet, the bookshelf camera in his grip, the USB cable torn clean from the back. He heard my shuffling slippers and turned around, and for one suspended second, his face was completely unguarded. Sharp cold, guilty, before the mask snapped back into place. "Dad, hey, sorry I let myself in, I hope that's okay." "James." I let my voice go high and confused, let my eyes go wide and a little frightened. What are you doing with that?" "It was loose," he said, stepping off the footstool with the camera tucked against his side like he had every right to it. The mount was coming off the shelf. I didn't want it to fall and break. I'm going to take it in and have it looked at okay. My hands shook genuinely this time. Not for performance, because the rage that moved through me in that moment was a clean and righteous thing, hot from the center of my chest, all the way to my fingertips. I gripped the doorframe and made sure none of it reached my face. "Oh," I said. "Oh, thank you, son. I wouldn't have known what to do with it." He smiled. He patted my shoulder. He left with my camera under his arm, and I stood in the doorway watching his taillights disappear around the corner. And when I was absolutely certain he was gone, I walked straight to my laptop, opened the Cloud app, and pulled up the footage from the hallway smoke detector. It had captured everything. James arriving through the front door. James pulling the footstool from the closet. James climbing up. James ripping the camera from the shelf with both hands, his jaw set and his eyes flat and purposeful, in a way that had nothing whatsoever to do with a loose mount. All of it time-stamped, all of it stored on a cloud server in Nashville that James did not know existed and could not reach. I saved the clip. I labeled it James Camera Destruction, October 22nd, 2025. I added it to the evidence folder. Then I called Laura Hayes. "He took the camera," I said when she picked up. "Did he now?" Her voice was measured, but I could hear the edge underneath it, the alert precision of a woman whose case had just gotten sharper. "Was the footage backed up before he got to it?" "Every clip from the last 3 weeks," I said. "All of it. He has no idea about the cloud." A pause. When she spoke again, there was something in her tone that I had not heard from her before. Not quite satisfaction, something more controlled than that. The quiet of a woman watching the last piece of a puzzle find its place. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I want you to do nothing different. Go about your week. Let him think he won." "Yes, ma'am. And Thomas—" A brief pause. "He just made our job a great deal easier." I ended the call and stood in the kitchen with both hands braced on the counter, looking out at the October yard, the bare oak, the cold, flat sky. My heart was hammering. My knuckles had gone white against the countertop edge. But underneath the fear, underneath the fury, something was settling into place with the slow, irrevocable weight of a door closing on everything James thought he had gotten away with. He had reached into my house and taken what he believed was the evidence against him. He had no idea he had just handed me the most damning footage of all. Laura Hayes called me on the morning of October 23rd, a Thursday, while I was sitting on the back porch with a mug of coffee I had not drunk a drop of because I had been too busy watching the yard and thinking. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the last of the oak leaves were coming down in slow, unhurried spirals, as if even the trees had decided there was no point rushing anymore. "Mr. Carter," she said, skipping pleasantries the way she always did, getting straight to the bone of things. "I need you to come in this afternoon. We have the footage reviewed, the physician's statement logged, and the samples are with our forensic consultant. I want to talk to you about next steps." "What time?" I said. 2:00. Come through the side entrance on 4th Street. Ask for me by name at the desk." I was there at 1:55. She met me in the same conference room as before. Blue plastic chairs, wobbling table, but this time she was not alone. A younger man in a charcoal suit sat to her left, a laptop open in front of him, a yellow legal pad covered in tight handwriting beside it. Hayes introduced him as Marcus Webb, the assistant district attorney assigned to the case. "Mr. Carter," Webb said, reaching across the table to shake my hand with the firm, measured grip of a man who needed you to trust him immediately. He looked maybe 35, sharp-eyed and careful. "Laura has briefed me on everything you've brought in. I want to start by saying the evidentiary package you've assembled is remarkable for a civilian. My wife taught me to document things," I said. "She kept records of everything. I should have learned sooner." Something shifted in Webb's expression. The professional composure softened for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry about your wife, sir." "Thank you." I set my hands flat on the table. "Tell me what we have." Hayes took over the way I had come to understand she always did when it was time to move from sympathy to strategy. She turned the laptop to face me. On the screen was a compiled video file, a timeline of footage, one clip following another in clean chronological order. She walked me through it piece by piece. Rachel at the tin box. Rachel's hand lifting the wedding ring. Rachel's fingers closing over the brooch. Rachel at the kitchen counter with the white powder. James at my kitchen table saying, "Sometimes the people who love us have to make the hard calls." James on the footstool, ripping the camera from the shelf. I watched every second of it. My jaw was locked so hard by the end that I could feel the ache in my back teeth. My hands were flat and still on the table surface only because I was pressing them there with everything I had. "The soup samples," Hayes said, tapping her notepad, "have been confirmed by our forensic consultant as containing amlodipine, consistent with the compound in your blood panel, and consistent with the samples your late wife preserved in 2019. We have a physician's corroborating statement, cloud time-stamped footage, and 3 weeks of documented cash shortfalls with UV-traced currency." "Is it enough?" I asked. Webb leaned forward. "For the theft charges, yes, unambiguously. For the medication tampering, yes, the evidence is strong. For the case involving your wife—" He paused, and I watched him choose his next words with the precision of a man who knew how much they would cost. "It is not yet sufficient for a murder charge. The chain of custody on those 2019 samples is 6 years old. But it is more than sufficient to reopen the case as a suspicious death, and it establishes a pattern that a jury will find very difficult to ignore." I nodded. My throat was tight, but my mind was clear. "What do you need from me?" Hayes picked up her pen. "The signing is scheduled for October 31st, 7 days from now. James expects you to sit at Gerald Whitmore's office table and sign a durable power of attorney transferring full control of your assets to him." She looked at me steadily. "We are going to let him believe that is exactly what is going to happen." "And what is actually going to happen?" I said. The corner of her mouth moved that almost smile I was beginning to recognize. "We are going to compile every clip of footage into a single video, approximately 18 minutes. We are going to arrange for that video to play on the television in Gerald Whitmore's conference room at the moment James places the document in front of you to sign." The simplicity of it struck me like a physical thing. I sat back in my chair, and felt something move through my chest, not quite satisfaction, not yet something more fragile than that. The sensation of a door that had been locked for a very long time beginning slowly to open. "Gerald Whitmore," I said. "Does he know?" "He will," Hayes said. "Marcus and I are meeting with him tomorrow morning. He is not involved in James's plan. Our review of the POA document confirms James commissioned it through a third-party referral, not through Whitmore directly. When we show him what his office is about to be used for, he will cooperate. And if James brings a witness, a notary, let him," Webb said with a calm that bordered on serene. "More witnesses means more people in the room when the screen comes on." I pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the frozen frame on the laptop screen. Rachel's hand closed around Margaret's wedding ring. I had not let myself look at that image for more than a second at a time since the footage first uploaded. Now I held my gaze on it and let the grief and the fury and the cold determination all exist in the same breath. "All right," I said. "Let's finish this." Hayes walked me out through the side entrance at 3:45. The October afternoon was cold and colorless, the sky pressing down low over Franklin like a lid. "Mr. Carter," she said at the door, "I need you to keep performing for one more week. Can you do that?" I thought of Margaret's letter. I thought of her handwriting on those sealed sample bags. I thought of 41 years in a house that my son was planning to strip away from me while I was still breathing in it. "One more week," I said, "is nothing." I walked to my truck without looking back, and the cold air hit my face like something clean, like something that had been a long time coming. Rachel arrived at my house on the Saturday morning of October 25th, 2025, without James. That was new. She knocked instead of using the key, also new, and when I opened the door, she was holding a covered pot with both hands and wearing a smile so warm and so precisely calibrated that it would have melted the resolve of any man who did not already know what lived behind it. "James had a work call," she said, stepping inside before I had fully opened the door, moving through my hallway, the way she always moved, like she owned every inch of it and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. "I didn't want you to be alone on a Saturday, so I made your soup." "You are too good to me, Rachel," I said, and meant it in a way she would never understand. She set the pot on the stove and started moving around the kitchen spoon, from the drawer bowl, from the cabinet. Salt from the shelf above the stove with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been rehearsing this particular performance for months. I settled into my chair at the kitchen table and watched her through eyes that I kept soft and grateful and slightly unfocused. The smoke detector on the kitchen ceiling, the second camera, the one James had never thought to look up at, was recording every movement she made. "You're looking a little pale," Rachel said, setting the bowl in front of me and pulling out the chair to my left. She sat closer than necessary and rested her hand over mine on the table. Her fingers were cool. Her eyes were warm. The combination was extraordinary. "Have you been sleeping on and off?" I said. "The nights are long when you live alone." "I know." She squeezed my hand. "That's exactly what James and I were talking about. You shouldn't have to do this alone, Thomas. You deserve to be somewhere you're looked after. Properly looked after." "Magnolia Ridge," I said, the way a man repeats a word he is slowly being taught to accept. "It's a beautiful place," she said. "We went back to see it again this week. They have a garden, roses, Thomas, all different colors, and a music room. You always loved music." I stirred the soup slowly. The steam curled up between us. My eyes went soft and a little distant, the way they had been doing for 10 days now. "Margaret loved roses," I said. Rachel's face arranged itself into an expression of tender sorrow, so convincing I might have believed it myself once. "She did. She would have wanted you somewhere beautiful." I lifted the spoon to my mouth and took one slow sip, just enough to be convincing. The soup was good. She was a skilled cook. I had always given her that. I set the spoon down and looked at the bowl, letting my expression drift into the vague, soft-edged distance of a man whose grasp on the present was loosening. The front door opened. James. His work call had apparently ended early. Dad. He came into the kitchen with the rolling ease of a man who had stopped treating this house as anyone else's space. He pulled out the chair across from me, dropped his keys on the table, and looked at the soup bowl. Good you're eating. You look tired, but at least you're eating. Rachel made it, I said. She's so good to me. James smiled at Rachel, a quick private smile the kind couples exchange over a shared project, and she smiled back. I watched it happen. I catalogued it. I kept stirring my soup. Dad, James said, leaning forward on his elbows. I wanted to talk to you about the appointment next Thursday at Gerald Whitmore's office. You remember we discussed the paperwork, the document that lets Rachel and me help manage things if you ever need us to. The signing, I said, nodding slowly. Right. I just want to make sure you're feeling okay about it. It's nothing scary. It just means we can step in and help if things get harder for you to manage on your own. I trust you, James, I said. His shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, the release of a man who has been holding a breath for a very long time. He reached across the table and gripped my forearm. That means everything to me, Dad. It really does. Rachel stood to refill my water glass. While her back was turned, James leaned forward another inch and lowered his voice, not a whisper, but close the volume of a man who was not thinking about ceilings. Did she eat yet? He murmured to Rachel's back. Rachel turned halfway, keeping her voice equally low and easy, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than a grocery list. He just started. James gave a small, satisfied nod. Good. Don't give him too much today. We need him sharp enough to sign on Thursday. My spoon stopped moving in the bowl. My hand was completely still. My face was still soft, still distant, still performing 69 years old, and confused and grateful for the soup. But inside my chest, behind the careful mask, something detonated, white-hot and righteous and devastatingly complete. Those 7 words. Don't give him too much today. Not a concern about my welfare. Not a fear that the dosage would harm me. A calibration. A schedule. A management decision made about a man sitting 3 feet away who they believed had no idea what they were doing to him. The smoke detector camera on the ceiling had caught every syllable. This is delicious, Rachel, I said, lifting the spoon again with a trembling hand. My voice was steady. My eyes were warm. You always know exactly what I need. She turned back from the counter and beamed at me genuinely, pleased, genuinely believing the performance, genuinely certain that the old man at the kitchen table was exactly what they had made him. That's what family is for, Thomas, she said. James leaned back in his chair with the satisfied ease of a man whose plans were on schedule. He picked up his phone and began scrolling, confident, unhurried, already living in the version of the future he had constructed, the one where Thomas Carter signed his name on a Thursday morning and ceased to be anyone's problem. 6 days. That was all the time they had left, though neither of them knew it yet. I lifted my soup spoon and kept performing, and the camera on the ceiling kept recording, and outside the kitchen window, the October sky pressed down cold and low over Franklin, Tennessee, indifferent to what was happening below it, the way October always is, patient and gray, and waiting for everything to fall. The Sunday after October 25th was the quietest day I had known in weeks. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of a house holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold beside me, and a yellow legal pad in front of me, writing down every date, every amount, every detail I could remember in the order it had happened, because Laura Hayes had asked me for a written timeline in my own hand to accompany the evidence file. I wrote for 3 hours. My hand cramped twice. I kept going. By Tuesday morning, October 28th, I had a sealed envelope on the passenger seat of my truck and a knot in my stomach that no amount of coffee was going to loosen. I drove to the Franklin Police Department, came through the side entrance on 4th Street, the way Hayes had shown me, and asked for her at the desk. She came out in under 2 minutes, which told me she had been expecting me. "You have the timeline," she said by way of greeting. "And the final cloud export," I said, handing her the envelope. "Every clip time-stamped in chronological order. 22 separate files. I put a written index inside the envelope so you know what each one shows." She took it with both hands and held it the way you hold something that matters. "Come back," she said. "Marcus is already here." Webb was in the conference room with his laptop open and 2 legal pads covered in handwriting that looked like a foreign language, abbreviations, case numbers, statute references, arrows connecting one thing to another. He stood when I came in, shook my hand, and got straight to it. "Mr. Carter, we are ready to proceed. As of this morning, we have enough for arrest warrants on both James and Rachel Carter, elder financial abuse, criminal theft, and unlawful medication tampering. The DA has signed off." The words landed in my chest like stones dropped into still water, each one sending out a ring I could feel all the way to my fingertips. I gripped the back of the plastic chair and steadied myself. "Both of them," I said. "Both of them," Webb confirmed. "The warrants will be executed immediately following the signing ceremony inside Whitmore's office. Officers will be positioned in the building before you arrive." I looked at Hayes. "And the video?" She turned her laptop to face me. On screen was a video player, a single compiled file labeled Carter Evidence Final Cut 1824. She pressed play and let me watch the first 60 seconds, Rachel at the tin box. The ring lifted the brooch, taken the white powder James on the footstool. Destroying the camera, James leaning across the kitchen table, whispering, "Don't give him too much today." 18 minutes and 24 seconds of everything they had done assembled in order, time-stamped and clean and absolutely irrefutable. My throat closed. My eyes burned hot and sudden, the kind of burning that comes not from sadness, but from the overwhelming, staggering relief of being believed, of having the truth exist somewhere outside of your own body, documented and witnessed and real. "That will play on the conference room television," Hayes said quietly. "Gerald Whitmore has agreed to cooperate fully. He will have the TV mounted and the file loaded on a USB drive. The moment James places the document in front of you to sign, Whitmore will start the video." "Does Whitmore know what's on it?" I asked. "He does." Hayes paused. He was shaken. He said he had no idea his office had been used this way. "He wasn't the only one," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Webb leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, I need to ask you directly. Are you prepared for Thursday? Because once that video plays, everything moves very fast. James and Rachel will be arrested in the room. It will be loud. It will be ugly. And you will be sitting at that table watching it happen." I thought about Margaret's letter on the bedside table. I thought about her handwriting on those sealed bags. I thought about 41 years of a life that James had looked at and seen nothing but an inheritance. "I have been preparing for Thursday," I said, "since the first morning I counted the money in that tin box and knew something was wrong. I am ready." Webb nodded once firmly and made a note on his legal pad. Hayes walked me out to the side entrance again. The October afternoon was raw and gray, the wind coming in from the north with a bite that went straight through my jacket. "One more thing," she said, stopping at the door. "On Thursday, when the video starts playing, do not look at James. Look at the screen. Let the evidence speak. You don't need to say a single word. And if he tries to leave, he won't get far," she said simply. I stepped out into the cold and walked to my truck, and for the first time since the morning, I had opened Margaret's safe and found her letter. The weight on my chest had shifted, not gone, not yet, but redistributed, shared, no longer mine alone to carry. 2 days. That was all that was left between the life James had planned for me and the truth I had spent 3 weeks building brick by careful brick. I drove home through a Franklin that looked exactly the same as it always had and felt like a completely different world. James called at 7:15 on the evening of October 29th, a Wednesday, while I was sitting in Margaret's armchair by the living room window, watching the streetlights come on one by one down the length of our road. I had not turned on the lamps inside. I had been sitting in the growing dark for almost an hour just thinking. The phone buzzed on the armrest and his name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice, just long enough to seem like a man moving slowly, and answered. "Dad, hey. Just checking in." His voice was warm, easy, the voice of a devoted son with nothing on his mind. "How are you feeling tonight?" "Tired," I said, letting my voice carry the soft, frayed quality I had been practicing. "A little confused. I keep forgetting what day it is." "It's Wednesday, Dad. Tomorrow is Thursday, remember? We have the appointment at Gerald Whitmore's office. 10 o'clock. "The paperwork," I said slowly. "Right. The paperwork. It's just a simple document you just need to sign your name, and then Rachel and I can start helping you manage things properly." "Okay, James," I said. "Whatever you think is best." A pause brief, satisfied. "That's good, Dad. That's really good. Rachel and I will pick you up at 9:30. You don't have to worry about a thing." "I know," I said. "I trust you, son." 3 words. The most expensive lie I had ever told. I felt them leave my mouth and hated the taste of them. Hated that I had needed to say them at all. Hated what it meant about who my son had become while I was busy loving him. "Get some rest," James said. "Big day tomorrow." "Good night, James." The call ended. I set the phone on the armrest and pressed both hands over my face, breathing into my palms, feeling the full weight of everything that was coming pressed down on my shoulders in the dark. My eyes were burning. My chest ached with a dull, persistent throb that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the fact that I was 70 years old and I had just told my son I trusted him and he had believed it, and tomorrow it would all be over. Rachel came at 8. She knocked this time, which she had taken to doing since James destroyed the camera, a small, unconscious adjustment, a sign that some instinct in her knew the dynamic had shifted, even if her conscious mind had not caught up. "I brought you something light," she said, holding up a small container. "Chicken broth. Nothing heavy before a big day." She heated it on the stove while I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move. She was wearing a blue cardigan, and her hair was down, and she looked like someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone entirely ordinary. And the distance between that appearance and what I knew about her made my stomach turn in a way that had never fully stopped in 3 weeks. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, setting the broth in front of me and sitting down across the table. "A little," I said honestly, because that much was true. "Don't be." She folded her hands on the table. "It's going to be fine, Thomas. Everything is going to be so much better after tomorrow. You'll see." "You really think so?" I looked at her over the bowl, soft-eyed and searching. "I know so." She smiled wide, certain the smile of a woman standing on ground she believed was solid beneath her feet. "James and I are going to take such good care of you." I nodded slowly and lifted the spoon. I took one sip of the broth and set it down and let my hands rest in my lap and looked at the woman across the table from me, this woman who had come into my son's life and my house and my kitchen, who had stolen Margaret's ring from my bedside drawer and crushed white powder into my soup and smiled at me exactly the way she was smiling now, and I felt something in my chest crack open like old wood in the cold. Not rage. Not anymore. Something older and sadder than rage. Grief, maybe, for the family this could have been. For the son James had been before whatever this was had taken hold of him. For the 41 years Margaret and I had built in this house, now reduced to a line item in someone else's plan. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, "for everything you've done for me." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Always, Thomas." After she left, I walked through every room in the house. The kitchen where Margaret had canned peaches every August. the hallway where James had measured his height against the doorframe until he was 17, the bedroom where I had found the safe and the letter and the truth that had changed everything. I stopped at the bedroom window and looked out at the dark yard, at the bare oak, at the cold, clear October sky pressing down over Franklin, and I spoke out loud to the house, to Margaret, to the 41 years of ordinary life that had been worth fighting for. Tomorrow, I said, tomorrow it ends. I turned off the light and went to bed and lay on my back in the dark and did not sleep for a very long time. James and Rachel picked me up at 9:28 on the morning of October 31st, 2025. James was wearing his charcoal sport coat again, the one he wore when he needed to project authority, and Rachel had on a cream blouse with pearl buttons that caught the pale autumn light as she came up my front walk. They looked like a couple on their way to something important. They looked like people who had already won. "Morning, Dad." James hugged me at the door, brief and practiced. "You ready?" "I think so," I said in the soft, uncertain voice I had been wearing like a second skin for 3 weeks. I had my jacket on. My hands were in my pockets. My wedding ring was on my finger. "I keep forgetting why we're going." "The paperwork," Rachel said, gently taking my arm as we walked to the car. "Just your signature, Thomas. That's all. Just my signature," I repeated like a man learning a new word. Gerald Whitmore's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Main Street. Dark wood paneling framed diplomas, the particular hush of a place where serious things were documented and sealed. Whitmore met us at the door himself, a trim man in his 60s with silver at his temples, and an expression so carefully neutral it must have cost him considerable effort. He shook James's hand, nodded at Rachel, and then looked at me, and in that half-second of eye contact between us, something passed that James did not see and would not have understood if he had. "Mr. Carter," Whitmore said, "please come in and sit down." The conference room was long and rectangular, with a mahogany table running down the center and a flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. I noticed, newer than the rest of the room's furnishings, the kind of addition that had been made recently and deliberately. James did not notice it. He was already pulling a chair out at the head of the table, already reaching into his briefcase for the document, already living inside the ending he had written for himself. Rachel helped me into the chair nearest the door, a small, unconscious courtesy that told me everything about how certain she was. She sat to my right. James sat across from me, spreading 7 pages of the power of attorney flat on the table with the careful precision of a man who had handled this document many times in his imagination. "Okay, Dad," James said, sliding a pen across the table toward me. "It's just the last page. Your full name right there." He tapped the signature line with one finger. "Take your time." I looked at the pen. I looked at the signature line. I looked at my son's face across the mahogany table. The practiced patience there. The controlled eagerness underneath it. The absolute certainty that the old man in the chair across from him was about to hand him everything. I picked up the pen, held it over the page, and looked at Gerald Whitmore. Whitmore cleared his throat, once reached beneath the table, and pressed the button on the remote in his lap. The television on the far wall came on. The first image was Rachel at my kitchen tin box, her hand lifting the lid, her fingers closing around the folded cash, methodical and unhurried. The timestamp in the corner read October 7th, 2025, 11:34 a.m. James's head turned toward the screen so fast I heard his neck crack. "What?" The word came out ragged, stripped of all the careful warmth he had been wearing all morning. "What is that, Whitmore? What is—" "Please remain seated, Mr. Carter," Whitmore said, his voice carrying the particular calm of a man who had been told exactly what to say. The video kept playing. Rachel taking the wedding ring from the bedside drawer. Rachel's hand with the brooch. Rachel at the stove, the small twist of white powder dropping into the soup. Then James at the kitchen table. Sometimes the people who love us have to make the hard calls. Then James on the footstool, ripping the camera from the shelf. Then James leaning across the table, voice low, "Don't give him too much today." Rachel made a sound I had never heard from her before, a short, sharp intake of breath like something inside her had snapped. She shoved back from the table and stood, and her face, that carefully composed, warm, endlessly patient face, had come completely apart. Her eyes were wild. Her hands were shaking at her sides. "James." Her voice cracked on his name. "James, how did he—" "Shut up." James was on his feet, his chair scraping back hard against the floor. His face had gone a color I had no name for, not red, not white. Something between the two, mottled with a fury, and a fear that were fighting each other for space. He slammed both palms on the table and leaned toward me, and I looked at him. Really looked at him, my son, 42 years old, wearing his authority coat, and felt my heart break and harden in the same exact moment. "Dad." His voice dropped low, urgent, stripped bare. "Dad, you need to listen to me. Whatever you think you know, this is not what it looks like. I was trying to protect you. I swear to God, I was trying to protect you." "James," I said, and my voice came out clear and steady and quiet as a stone dropping into deep water. "I know exactly what it looks like." The conference room door opened. Laura Hayes walked in first, Marcus Webb behind her, and two uniformed officers behind him. Hayes looked at James with the focused, unhurried expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this exact moment. "James Carter," she said, "you are under arrest for elder financial abuse, criminal theft, and unlawful medication tampering. You have the right to remain silent." James turned toward the door, and for one suspended second, his whole body went rigid, every muscle locked, every option running out simultaneously. Then Rachel made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a cry, something broken and formless, and grabbed the edge of the table as her knees gave way beneath her. "No," she said. "No, no, no." The officers moved. Hayes read the rights in a clear, steady voice while the video continued playing on the wall behind her, and I sat in my chair with the pen still in my hand and watched my son put his wrists together for the handcuffs, and did not look away because Margaret had asked me not to. I had promised her, and I kept my promises. The weeks that followed, October 30th moved the way time moves after something enormous, strangely unevenly, some days stretching out long and exhausted, and others collapsing into nothing before I had time to register them. James and Rachel were arraigned on November 3rd, 2025. Bail was set at amounts neither of them could meet without the assets they had been planning to steal, which struck me as a particular kind of justice. I sat in the front row of the courtroom on the morning of the arraignment. Dr. Daniel Brooks was to my left. Laura Hayes was to my right. I had not asked either of them to come. They had simply shown up the way people do when they understand that some mornings are too heavy to carry alone. James was brought in wearing a gray jail suit, his hands cuffed in front of him, and when he walked through the door and his eyes found mine across the courtroom, something moved across his face that I had not expected. Not defiance, not the cold calculation I had seen in Whitmore's conference room. Something younger than that. Something that looked for just one unguarded second, like a boy who understood he had done something that could not be undone. My chest cracked open. My eyes burned so fiercely I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathe through my mouth. I loved him. God help me, I loved him the way you love someone you made from nothing, and that love did not go away simply because he had tried to destroy me. It sat in my chest alongside the grief and the fury and the exhaustion. All 4 things occupying the same space at the same time, the way only the most complicated truths can. "You all right?" Brooks said quietly close to my ear. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." Laura Hayes called me on the morning of November 17th, with news I had been both hoping for and dreading in equal measure. "We've filed to reopen Margaret's case," she said, with the careful, precise delivery she used when she was carrying something heavy and did not want to drop it. The forensic consultant confirmed the drug in her 2019 samples matches the compound in your blood panel. "The pattern is, Thomas, the pattern is unambiguous." My hand tightened on the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "Is it enough?" A pause that told me everything before she spoke. "For a murder charge, not yet. The chain of custody, the age of the samples, the absence of direct witnessed administration, a jury would need more than we currently have. But it is more than enough to designate her death as a suspicious death requiring full reinvestigation. And it establishes a documented pattern of conduct that will be presented to the jury at James and Rachel's trial, so they may never be charged for what they did to her," I said. My voice came out flat, scraped clean of everything but the bare fact of it. "I want to be honest with you," Hayes said. "That is a possibility we have to hold. What I can tell you is that everything Margaret documented, everything she preserved in that safe is now part of the official record. Her evidence will be heard in court. Her name will be in those files. What was done to her will not disappear." I stood at the kitchen window for a long time after that call ended, looking out at the backyard where the oak tree had finally gone completely bare. The yard looked wide open without its leaves exposed and cold and very, very clear. "They heard you, Margaret," I said to the window to the yard to wherever she was. "They are listening." I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass and held it there until I could breathe evenly again. The trial was set for February 2026. Marcus Webb called me in December to go over testimony preparation, and he said something at the end of that meeting that I had been carrying with me ever since. "Mr. Carter," he said, straightening his legal pad, "most people in your position being poisoned, being robbed, being systematically undermined by their own family, most people either don't notice until it's too late, or they notice and they fall apart. You did neither. You built a case. You documented everything. You held yourself together for 3 weeks under conditions that would have broken most men half your age." He looked at me directly. "Margaret Carter raised a good son, too. I hope you know that." My throat closed so fast I could not answer him for a full 10 seconds. When I could speak, my voice was barely above a whisper. "She did," I said. "She always did." On a Saturday in mid-December, I drove to the cemetery on the east side of Franklin, the old one with the iron gate and the pecan trees, and sat beside Margaret's grave in the cold, with my jacket buttoned to the collar and my hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee, the way we used to sit on the back porch together on Sunday mornings, when the air was too cold for comfort, but too beautiful to stay inside. "I found your letter," I told her. "I found the samples, the lab results, everything you hid from me. It worked, Margaret. All of it worked." The pecan trees above me shifted in the wind, their bare branches crossing and uncrossing against a sky the color of pewter. Somewhere across the cemetery, a bird called once and went quiet. "I'm going to be all right," I said. "The house is still ours. Everything you built is still there." My voice broke on the last word just once, and I let it. "I miss you every single day. I want you to know that too." I sat there until the thermos was empty, and the cold had worked its way through my jacket, and my bones were aching, and I did not care even slightly. I had nowhere else I needed to be. I had all the time in the world, and for the first time in 3 months, sitting in the cold, beside the woman I had loved for 41 years. I felt something that was not grief, and was not fury, and was not fear. I felt like myself again. And that, more than the arrests, more than the evidence, more than any verdict any jury would ever deliver, that was the thing they had tried to take from me and failed. I am not a man who tells his story easily. For most of my life, I believed that what happened inside a family stayed inside a family, that silence was loyalty and loyalty was love. I was wrong about that. I was wrong for a long time. If this Grandpa's Stories has taught me anything, it is this: the people who love you will never need to dim your mind to keep you close. They will never need to steal from you quietly or manage your clarity like a dosage. Real love does not require your signature on a document you don't fully understand. I wish I had known that sooner. I wish I had trusted my instincts the morning I first counted the money in that tin box and felt something cold move through my chest. Don't be like me. Don't wait for proof so overwhelming that the person who gathered it was your dead wife speaking to you from a letter she wrote 6 years before you were ready to hear it. I believe God put Margaret's words in that safe for a reason. He knew I would need them. He knew I would not find them until I was desperate enough to look. Every family story carries weight that outsiders cannot see. This one carried mine: the grief, the betrayal, the love that did not stop even when it probably should have. My personal opinion, for whatever it is worth, greed is not born overnight. It is grown slowly in small decisions in the space between what a person tells themselves and what they actually do. Guard that space carefully. In your own life, in your own family story, pay attention to the small things. The small things are never small. If something in this Grandpa's Stories felt familiar, if it stirred something you have been carrying, quietly leave a word in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this one matter to you, consider staying with this channel because there are more to come. Thank you sincerely for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know. A gentle note: before you go, the stories ahead contain certain fictionalized elements constructed entirely for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what suits you best. But if you are staying, welcome. The next chapter begins soon.